an A&R request for 133 Essex Street. The senior housing special permit public hearings continued for 133 Essex and board business. So just to be clear,
Thank you.
we want to see if we can be time efficient and ensure a smooth flow of the hearing process, no matter what topic we're on. So tonight, the applicant has informed us that they have a hard stop at 8 o'clock. So what I'd like to suggest is that we give the applicant 20 minutes for presentation, and then 20 minutes for the board to ask questions, get clarifications, and then we'll allow 20 minutes for the public to weigh in with their comments, concerns, and issues. So I'd like to change the order of the agenda from the two A&R requests to open up this senior housing special permit continuation. And before we end at the 8 o'clock, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to clarify exactly what will be the next subjects for discussion so we know what's coming, because we'd like to keep these to manageable amounts of information and discussion. And going forward, I'd like to keep these so that by 9 o'clock, we've covered the substantive issues, the board's discussed them, and the public has had a chance to weigh in as well. Now, that can be flexible and run over, but I'd like to keep that because really by 9 a.m., I think 2 hours, most people will have probably reached their limit of having input, discussion, and we want to stay sharp in hearing all the issues and discussions that we want to cover. So having said that, I'd like to open it up. You have a comment? Okay, we can take a roll call vote to who is here. So we'll start with Pat.
Corey Volue, present.
Marty Crouch, present.
Rick Mitchell here.
Richard Boroff, present.
Bill Wheaton, present.
Jonathan Poor, present.
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Okay.
May I ask why we're doing this?
Actually, no, because we're going to try and be efficient. We just did it. It's process and procedure. So is the applicant available to begin their presentation?
Doesn't appear to.
Jill Mann.
Well, that will make this a very short meeting.
Larry Smith will want to speak also.
She's on. Yes, she's on.
Good evening, Jill Mann. I just hadn't been admitted yet as a panelist. This evening, Mr. Mitchell, are we going to go over the A&R plans, or how would you like to proceed?
Well, you've got a hard stop at 8 o'clock. We've designated 20 minutes for your presentation, 20 minutes for discussion of the board, and 20 minutes for input by the public. So you pick what you'd like to discuss and accomplish in the time we have available.
Okay, so I'm just going to then dive right into the presentation with regard to the special permit and go over those things that we if somebody could allow me to share my screen, then I'll put up the PowerPoint, just so we can use that as a formula.
Everybody has one of these.
Okay, go ahead.
Perfect. So again, good evening. Jill Mann here on behalf of Chewbacca Hill Capital Partners. I'm not going to go through the whole presentation for the people because we want to get to the meat of it with regard to the timing. At our last hearing, we had decided that we were going to very particularly describe those items that we are going to review during each hearing, allow for board comment, as Mr. Mitchell just said, and then immediately for a butter comment. So today, the point would be to confirm project eligibility and compliance so that we get to density. We're going to review the updated cross-section of the intersection, and then the 3D renderings of the intersection, and then also the trails. So I just put up, the vision of what it's going to look like in the front, and here is just a picture of the landscape plan. Essentially, this particular property is cut into two lots, Lot 1, Lot 2. Lot 1 and 2 are the subject of an approval not required plan. They do not show a subdivision because each of those lots has frontage on a way. And a subdivision is something that does not have proper access and access needs to be developed, i.e. the creation of a road. Neither of those two lots require that. So the approval not required plan, we simply are showing those lot lines. Lot 1, Lot 2. Lot 2 includes the farmland. Lot 1 includes the open space that will be counted, and then also the development area. And I'll go through those right now. We are going to create the senior housing. It is still going to be on a 16.2 acre parcel or section of Lot 2. The development is going to consist of 50 dwelling units. That's what we're proposing. And we are going to preserve the open space, which would be the balance of Lot 1, which is 50 acres of land. We still are providing open space via the farmland that will still be dedicated and is a part of the special permit and is being offered simply as open space. As far as eligibility and compliance, Lot 1 is eligible to be developed as a 50-unit senior residential development. It's located in the R1B district, which means it has the zoning required. R1B district. Only 26% of it is in the GPOD, so all of the applicable requirements of the R1B apply. Pursuant to all of the required sections, we're a 55 and older development. We're going to restrict it pursuant to condominium documents, which we've delivered. We comply with all density and size limitations with regard to the particular location of the lot. I had provided those aerial plans, and I believe that everybody has vetted those, and that when I drew a 1 mile radius around this property, neither of the two existing senior housing projects were within it, despite the fact that it is only half a mile or also 1/3 of a mile. It depends if you're looking at 1 or 2. The townwide number after this project, if it were approved for 50 units, would only be 85. The townwide limit is 100, so we comply. The development itself is limited to a 50-unit maximum. There can be no single senior housing project that has more than 50 units. Therefore, we limit this when we talk about density to 50 units. As I said, the development is only going to contain those units that comply. They'll only be 55 and older restricted as far as use, and they will only be 2-bedroom units. So now we get into the real meat of what is being proposed. So base density. Again, I just want to reiterate the fact that we are going for base density. It doesn't, just because we approve base density doesn't mean this board is approving the project. It simply means, do you meet the definitional requirements under section 8.28 and 8.29 for how many units may be put on a single project and or this project. So developable acres, we're looking only at Lot 1. Pursuant to your bylaw, Lot 1 has 44.6 developable acres. The definition of developable acres is simply what's upland. You take how much land you have, you take out all the wetland, that leaves you developable acres. There are 56.8 acres of land in Lot 1, 44 acres of which are all upland. So there's only 12 acres of wetland on Lot 1. That leaves us again with 44. When you calculate developable acres, every lot, full lot, is able to be developed for 2 dwelling units. That's why it ends up being 88. You know, some people would think if you just multiply it times 2, you get 89 units. That's not the way it works. It doesn't matter anyway. It's moot because we can only do 50, but it's 88. So it's each full developable acre can be developed for 2 units. Base density basically is 44 times 2 or 88. Again, because there's a project limit. No single project can have more than 50 units. The actual base density for this particular property is pushed back to 50. What that means is for any other project, the density would be much higher than what we're proposing because we're limited with regard to the single project. At this point, if I may, Mr. Mitchell, it may not be a bad idea to segment each of the aspects of the project. So for example, at this point, maybe there could be a board discussion relative to base density, then we can hear from the abutters relative to base density, and then we can make a decision on it. This way, everything is just relevant and everybody is kind of has everything that I just discussed at the forefront of their mind. Would that be acceptable, Mr. Mitchell?
I think that would be. So now that we've stopped at this section, we'll ask board members if they have questions or any other input they'd like to make at this point. We'll go around the table. Emil?
Yes, good evening, Emil Dahlquist. Yeah, I think there should be a discussion about base density. I think what I have read in the zoning regulations and researched is that it is all based on conservation areas that need to be included. And one of the things that I noticed was that there's an absence of any definition of what conservation areas would be on a developable area. I had taken some of the drawings by the applicant and plotted them out at 100 scale, put them together, and try to identify steep slopes, which in a lot of literature, and actually in our codes and our bylaws, is indicated as primary or secondary conservation areas. And typically when you calculate developable areas, you subtract those, including wetlands, all the primary ones, floodplains, and the secondary ones. And there's been an absence of identification of any of the conservation areas, primarily steep slopes, or any other important natural features on that developed section. So I think when you run through that, that is a pretty dramatic change to what needs to be calculated for the areas. I mean, I know that the chart in the senior housing project indicated a base density of 2 per acre for R1B zones, but that to me might be a maximum number. I think it's only logical that you have to look at the particular site that's being developed. If you had a flat site, farmland, for example, with very little site cost, that's one scenario that could go to 2 per acre. But if you have a hilly section, it seems to me that dramatically changes the context, in which case I think that ought to impact the base density. So I think we need more discussion on this.
All right, so we'll hold that thought, Jonathan. And what I'm going to ask for efficiency and time management is not to repeat the same issue over again. So if somebody's already made a comment, let's not repeat it. Let's add something or clarify something that somebody said.
So I would concur with what Emil just said, and I guess a question I would have for the board is, if you're looking narrowly at 8.2.9, as far as strictly formulas, yes, the formulas make sense, but if you look at the whole lot qualitatively and read all of the other bylaws as a whole, as a harmonious whole, then I have questions about the base density.
So I have a question. So yours is a question of interpretation.
It's a question of interpretation, and it's a question of process, and it's a question of is this the right time to vote on that?
Okay, good. Bill?
I have some particular design features, but they have to do with the entrance and the removal of the ledge and the...
Right, but we're dealing with this.
But we're not dealing with that now, so
Right.
I'm okay.
Richard?
I'd have a question of what you're going to do about preserving the 12.2 acres of wetlands for the future.
Okay, Marnie?
I think if we look at the chart, as Emil noted, the base density of 50 is accurate. But I have to say that I think that the points that Jonathan and Emil made are well taken, and I think that they will be addressed when we start looking at the blasting and the potential effects on the water system. So again, it is a holistic approach that we need to take. So I think this density issue will probably be developed over time once we get further down the road in the more technical aspects of this project.
Thank you. Corey?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Pat, anything you'd like to add?
No, Patrick?
Patrick? Anything, any comments from Patrick Rappett?
When I work with the zoning bylaw every day, and I understand the amount of effort that went into the creation of the senior housing bylaw. It came before town meeting, as I understand, on at least 2 different occasions, 3, way before me. But I understand that the density element of it was an element that had a great deal of discussion, a great deal of input, and they set out a ceiling number of 50. This property is 66 acres. 50 units on 66 acres, as I see configured, I believe is entirely acceptable.
Okay. All right, Jill, you've heard comments. And I think, sorry. To summarize, there are some issue and concern regarding the conservation areas.
Sure, if I may. So I think I can pretty much sum up why there may be some misunderstandings. So with regard to Ms. Dahlquist's point, I understand, and those are all aspects of permitting, the special permit process. This is formulaic. This is strict in construction. There is really, there's no breadth of discretion here. It's pretty clear what developable acres are. And they are simply, and I put it up on the screen so people could see it, a developable acre is not defined as upland, less conservation areas. It is specific that it is exclusive only of wetlands. That's just what your bylaw says. So when you look at the developable acres, when a developer is doing it, in order to begin the process, you need to assess what your base density is. Now, this isn't an approval, and everybody is kind of getting it racked up again. We're being very segmented and very direct. And the one question is, what's the developable acres? It couldn't be more clear under 8.2.8. It is 44.6 acres. Lot 1 has 44.6 acres of land, not including any wetland. That's the math. And then the math with regard to incentives is discretionary, but the math relative to base is, again, what it is. It is 2 times whatever the developable acres are. And that again, it pops to 88. That doesn't mean we're looking for 88. But because your bylaw specifically cuts it back and says you can only have 50. But this discussion is not discretionary, and that's why I thought this would be very simple to kind of push through. I don't mean push through as we're going to push it through. I mean just for the board to actually come to a decision and review a segment of your bylaw, because it can't be more clear. It is exactly as written on your screen, and I think everybody can probably see it. I have it up there. So there was really no more discussion to be had relative to blasting, relative to the areas. That's all part of the site plan review process. And when we look and talk about the hydrology, we can make it clear to you, because we've been doing this and going back and forth with peer reviewer, why those elements are being protected properly, why we mitigate for harm. And that's part of the special permit process. This is formulaic, ministerial, and clearly set out in the bylaw. So I would not mind to engage more, but it's exceptionally clear.
Okay.
Thank
I see Deborah Eliason has her hand raised, but
sure.
we're still talking on the board, so just hold on a moment, Deborah. I think she is correct. This is about applying a strict formula, not getting into the subtleties of the construction process and how they're cited. So I'm not sure, and I think Marty made that point, we're really going to get into those discussions further on when we're talking about the actual land development.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment?
Go ahead.
The issue is, what is conservation area and how is that applied to maximum density? And looking at the bylaws that we have, if you look at the open space farmland preservation district, that was really information taken from a state code on doing subdivisions. And what it does is, step number one is you identify the conservation areas in the area to be developed. And I'll just read it directly. It says, the first step in the design process requires identification of conservation areas on the site. It also identifies what those conservation areas are. It's the regulated, the wetlands, riverfront areas, floodplains, all regulated by state, federal, or local law, and unprotected natural landscape features such as steep slopes and so on, wildlife habitat and so on. Now, typically when you do base density testing, you take the valued conservation areas off the project and you look at what's left, and then you calculate the area and then apply the factor to it. The other reference in our zoning code is in the State Overlay District 9.3. Once again, identify conservation areas, and they go through exactly the same procedure, identifying steep slopes. All of that leads to identifying and delineating a proposed development area. In fact, they then go into definitions, section 11, and they define the Estate Overlay District Yield Analysis Plan. And in that, they say the yield analysis, which is the density, shall determine base maximum density for proposed development, given the presence of natural building constraints on the site, such as wetlands, floodplains, steep slopes, and zoning requirements. The proponent shall have the burden of proof with regard to the basic maximum density. Now, granted, that's the Estate Overlay District, but we're looking at our bylaws as a whole, as a piece, and we're trying to figure out, now, does it make any sense that they would separate senior housing from all of these other districts, from the open space, from the Estate Overlay District? The only reason I could think they might make an exception there is they might have looked at it and maybe asked the question, why would you build senior housing on steep slopes? So maybe that was one reason they thought it wasn't important. But the way I'm trying to read the codes as a related document where everything matters in this, and trying to come up with, well, what is the base maximum density? And all I'm saying is that we have a whole area in the developed area that has not been identified for steep slopes. And by steep slopes is anything over 25% slope.
Yeah, that, however, is not defined in our bylaws. And again, I think we're trying to apply the basic formula here. You're taking a very, very broad approach. You're including bylaws that are not in front of us now. So while I appreciate your concern about slopes and conservation areas, we don't have a specific definition in those bylaws of conservation areas. Those are general references to what the bylaws would like to see preserved. So my concern is that we're going to get bogged down into a long and lengthy subjective discussion of what conservation areas are, as opposed to coming up to making a decision, is this formula as prescribed in the senior housing bylaw, not other bylaws, applicable in this instance?
I think that these positions are reconcilable. I think that the definition of base density in the senior housing bylaw is crystal clear. However, I think when the special permit itself is issued, identification of conservation areas, identification of steep slopes may potentially mean that the base density of 50 is no longer applicable. That's the starting point. But if that number of units is too much for this particular site because of the concerns that you raised, then the number of units is scaled back accordingly. So I think that we can address all your concerns in another context, say, for example, the effect of the blasting and how the slopes will be protected so that they don't cause erosion and that type of thing. So I think that when we start looking at those issues, we will identify then the areas that have to be concerned, and potentially then the density itself will be reduced. But under the statute, the senior housing bylaw, the actual language is quite clear. The base density is 50. That's the starting point. Whether it stays that way or not is anyone's guess at this point. We just don't have enough information to even go there.
Okay, and we'd like to go to Deborah Eliason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Deborah Ellison, Ellison Law Office, 63 Middle Street, Gloucester. I represent Save Tobacco Trails and Watershed. And I would like to briefly address a different issue with regard to the density. 8.6.2 does allow a maximum of 50 units, period. That's all it says. Maximum per project is 50 units. In this project, the developer is asking you for 50 market rate units on the project. They are, however, required to provide you with 6 affordable units. If those were developed on site, they would have 44 market rate units and 6 affordable. The fact that they're developing them off-site, in fact, they're not developing them at all, they're paying you, potentially, doesn't give them a right to have any more than 44 market rate units. The project is 50 units, and the project includes the affordable units. So I think the zoning bylaw is very clear that we start out with 44 market rate on site and 6 affordable paid for as a payment and fee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So somebody else have a?
I think that's Jill
It's
Mann.
just Jill. I apologize for interrupting you.
So I'd like to see if we can come to a conclusion on this because we're more than halfway through the applicant's time period and we've got a long way to go here. So I'd like to move and have a motion or actually get a sense of the board of whether we accept the base density as prescribed and presented. So we'll start with Corey.
I tend to agree that the base density is 50, but I also tend to agree with Ms. Ellison.
So is that an acceptance of the base density as presented?
As 50, yes, but
Okay. Marnie?
I agree that the base density is 50 under the senior housing law bylaw, but I caution that number is just, it's a definitional number. It has no relation on what the special permit will actually end up revealing as to the number of units that can be built.
So I take it that's an acceptance as.
It's an acceptance with a recognition that it's not
Right,
Casting
that-
Creek, and I think the applicant recognizes that as well.
Richard?
I think the base density would be 50. I don't agree that just because the payment is separate and excludes the need to reduce the base density to some other number. It's 50, period.
Okay. Bill?
I understand that 50 units comes as a constraint because projects are only allowed to be 50 units. And I would like to see a calculation of how many units could be built, given all of the issues of buildability without that constraint. The developer has simply said, we can build up to 50, so we're gonna build 50. I'd like to know a little bit more about, I'd like to investigate more about whether or not so much of this land is ledge. It would be categorized on a soil map as unbuildable, and you can always engineer anything else. I'd like to know I'd like to have an airing of what the buildable units would be without the 50 constraint. In other words, you're imposing, maybe they would say we could get 85 units in here, but we're only allowed 50.
Well, they've actually said they could get, using just the definition of the bylaw and not looking at conservation areas or any other potential restrictions, is 88 units.
Okay.
So my question, Bill, is based on the presentation, are you comfortable with the base density of being 50 units?
Yes.
Jonathan?
As a narrow definition of the calculation of the base density, I agree with the number 50.
Okay. Emil?
I acknowledge the number 50, however, what I do want to say, I think it's unfortunate we're going down this path. We're going to deal with one small issue at a time rather than dealing in a more general way about all the things that are applicable. We're going to agree to piece A, B, C, and D, and I don't think that's really the right way to go forward. But to answer your question, I acknowledge the number 50.
Okay, good. So we have consensus that the base density is accepted by the board as presented. We will discuss later, and I've said this many times, I'll say it again, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. These discussions are going to be going on for many months, and we will get into a very detailed discussion about what actually will be constructed on that site. So I don't want you to think that by moving this forward, we're going to ignore the concerns that you've expressed. This is a large, complex project with many pieces to it, and I think Marnie put it in perspective, is that we need to establish a foundation, and then we move from that foundation to determine what the final construct might look like. All right, Jill?
Thank you very much. I
Oh,
think
yeah, I'm
that's
sorry.
wonderful. I appreciate, the board's
I'm sorry.
discussion.
Wait a minute, hold on, Jill.
Outside of Deborah, there was one other person who had raised their hand, and there's two quite, I don't know if you're taking all public comments.
Sure.
Like this, but I think we'd have.
I know Mr. Smith wanted to speak.
Patrick, I'm just available to jump in case Jill needs me for something, but no.
I guess if people want to talk, they need to raise their hand.
Thank you.
Yes, if people want to talk, they need to raise their hand.
Public comment, exclamation mark.
Yep.
Al de Groot, I don't know if Al has comment, but no one's got their hands raised anymore. There was one, but, oh, here we go, Al.
Okay. All right, so Jill?
Sorry, Al did raise his hand. And should be able to.
Does Al have his hand still up? Is Al interested in commenting? We're looking for you, Al.
Hi, here I am, sorry. I'm just really curious. I had written it in the question and answers, but really curious about this issue of dividing the farmland lot and getting to the CPOD through what feels like three-card Monte. The sale, as my understanding, is for one lot. And if there is one lot, if they want to make it two lots, shouldn't they have to withdraw the offer and resell it as two separate lots? I don't understand how this can just be, oh, okay, we'll separate this. This seems like a very convenient situation, which any developer could do at any time to just say, oh, we won't include that. Very disturbing.
Okay, Al, thank you. We're not on that subject yet, but we will be shortly. So we'll take your comment and try and address those in our next, I believe, next section, Jill.
It's actually, that particular comment is probably not going to be discussed at all until when we talk about the actual project, because you're entitled to do an A&R lot as long as you continue to comply, which is what we just went through. There is an entitlement to do that. It's a personal property right, and the owners are not bound not to subdivide the property into two parcels. That's what they've done. The farmland, when we initially submitted the application, was always designated as other land because it's restricted and it's actually leased out and farmed. So just as an aside. So the actual next presentation point was actually to go through the updated cross-section. This was something that we had had discussions with Mr. Poor about, and he wanted to see how the back property was going to grade behind some of the units because of how the slope progressed outward and behind the units. I'm going to have Brent Cole and Jeff Merritt actually go through a more detailed presentation for you, Mr. Poor, but this is an updated analysis, and what you see, oops, I'm very sorry about that. I just flipped everything. What you see here is actually a smaller version of it, unfortunately. That's why I'm going to try and get it to be larger. I think that it's possible that it might be best. Brent, are you there? So to be Granite Engineering. There you guys are. Hi, guys. If I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if you want to walk through what you had done, Brent, that'd be great.
Sure. For the record, my name is Brent Cole with Granite Engineering. To my right is my colleague, Jeff Merritt, also from Granite Engineering.
Brent, can you speak up?
On the screen that yes, sir?
Speak up.
It's hard to hear you. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'll try to speak up as loud as possible. So as you can see on my screen here, Mr. Poor asked for the top of slope behind units 35, 34, 33, and 32. That top of slope on the plan view represents the limit of disturbance as well as the tree line as shown in through this area here. So as you can see, there's this dashed line behind the units, and that's that top of slope. So it's, 10 to 20 feet up behind the actual units itself, pretty far back from the units horizontally. And then for a further measure, we added the top of canopy, which would be the tree line sitting on top of this slope, which you can see adds a pretty good buffer behind the units.
At this point, Mr. Mitchell, I don't know if Mr. Poor or other board members have questions, because I know that this was something that was of great interest to the board.
I don't know. Jonathan?
I have no comments at this point. I don't think this is the right time to discuss this. I have comments in the future, but not tonight.
Any other board members have comments? Hearing none, does the public have any comments?
Nobody's got their hands raised. Oh, Tom, sorry. Hennigan.
Basically 20 foot of almost 50-degree sloping ledge. What's going to happen when it rains? Similarly here. 20 feet of 50
Tom?
Yeah, hi, good evening. This is Tom Hennigan from Ransom Consulting on behalf of Safe Chewbacca Trails and Watershed. So I'm trying to get my camera on for you. I just wanted to kind of present some additional thoughts with regard to the sections that the applicant just presented, and I was wondering if I could share my screen. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is similar perspective. These were the renderings that the applicant had provided. I know they haven't presented them yet this evening, but just wanted to provide this for reference. Just there've been some other mentions of this by the board members about the cut and fill on the site, particularly at the entrance. So, the first thing I wanted to show was just the renderings that they provided here at the entrance, and using the materials that they provide, I just superimposed here, if we took a line or a section through these houses, just to highlight, because it doesn't, in this rendering doesn't jump right out at you, where the existing ground surface is today. And as you can see, this red dashed line here, really in some cases runs through the roof lines of the houses. And, in some cases it's a 20-foot vertical cut of material that has to come out. And similar, they were highlighting the height of the canopy that would be available kind of on the back of the property. But if you think about it, the existing grade is where this red line is, and today there's additional canopy, much higher here. So when you're out here on the road looking in today, there's a lot of vegetation, that kind of looms over the road that is going to be cut, and then the existing ground elevation is going to be dropped down significantly. This is the section that they were just showing with highlighting the height of the canopy in this area beyond. But I just also wanted to highlight what doesn't necessarily jump right out at you as you look at some of these sections. So highlighting green here is the existing grade along that road and their profile. So in some cases here you have, as I said, a 20-foot deep cut in order to build that road. And as one of the other board member had referenced, we don't have a lot of detailed test pit or boring information, but just based on rock outcroppings in the area, it's pretty clear that there's a lot of ledge out in that area to be removed. And similarly, this is just that same profile I showed on the rendering of where existing grade is relative to those homes. So if you look at that from a perspective of rock removal or earthwork, in addition to kind of those 20-foot cuts along the road, I just sort of selected some spots in this area just at the entrance, not in the overall project, where you have 22, 24, 21, and then some in the teens here, all across that entrance area, with that just demonstrating that entire area is really being lowered significantly. And for instance, there's one here that's 14 feet, and that's probably 50 to 75 feet just from the road entrance. So when you talk about all that that rock removal, one thing that I think was requested early on in one of the first hearings was just to have a materials management plan or a better understanding of that rock removal process and where that material is going. Is it going to be processed on site and reused? But I think in general, whether it's rock or soil, based on the grading plan, there's going to be excess material generated from this project. I think it's unclear on how that's being handled. The number of truck trips, the number of, the amount of.
Tom, can I interrupt?
Yes?
Can I interrupt you here, Tom? Because
Sure.
you're really, I appreciate all the time and effort you put into this, and it's an interesting document that I'd like you to submit to the planning board.
Yeah.
But this is really a subject for future discussion, and we can get into this in detail. We were really just talking about the profiles that had been submitted on a request for one of the planning board, based on the request of one of the planning board members.
Okay,
And
I just want, yeah,
repeat my
thank you, Mr.
request?
Chairman. I just wanted to, demonstrate some things. It might not jump out when you look at those sections, but I understand. Thank you.
And I would just request too that before there's a presentation of materials, that they just distribute them to us. It just as a professional courtesy. I have no problem with them discussing it, but it is, as a professional courtesy, we would prefer to be able to see something before materials are presented. And we did discuss this before, so I would just repeat that request.
No, absolutely, and we'd like to see it as well. So it's an interesting topic for future discussion.
And we have that. So we have, in part of our discussion, and we had discussed this last meeting, the future agendas, we have scheduled to actually respond to the peer review and to provide that type of commentary, because we wanted to present an entire package so that the board could review in a comprehensive manner. And that's why we did not present this. We were asked for the site cross sections and then the 3D, which is what we've provided in addition to the trail.
No, I got it. All right, so,
Mr.
May I
Chairman,
make
if
a-
I
may I
might
make
just
a comment
address,
here?
we are trying to live within the rules of what the planning board has asked for, and we certainly expected when the elevations were discussed that we could discuss these different elevations also. And that's all. Thank you.
Right, it just would ask that you give us the plans before you come to the meeting with them, so we don't get them while you're talking about them, that's all.
yeah, and same for the planning board. Bill?
I find that, I find it particularly useful in the rendering diagrams, in the site plan cross-section, to have the current elevation of the rock in the background, so you can get a clearer picture of how much is changing as opposed to what it's going to look like. And in the earlier cross-sections, other parts of the project, it would be helpful to put in that existing ground elevation as well. It would just be very informative.
Yeah, and I think that will come in the future discussions.
We actually do show it, Mr. Mitchell, on this plan. The top line that you see on the screen is the top of the canopy, but the lower line is actually reflective of, oops, I did it again, is reflective, and Brent can show it to you better, because I just put this in PowerPoint.
I can share my screen.
Yeah, please.
No,
So we
I'm
did show
saying-
the existing elevation intentionally, because we understand, Mr. Wheaton, that you
Yes,
would
no,
want to see
what I'm
what's your
saying
top slope now.
What I'm saying is I appreciate that very much. And there were a series of earlier renderings which had
Yeah.
cross-sections at different points in the project. And I would love to see that same existing elevation line drawn on those.
And
Yes,
Mr. Wheaton,
on
I
those,
think you will
exactly,
find
exactly.
that-
I don't
that
think it's
line,
on.
It's
is
a
it-
black dashed line on any of the cross sections. The solid black line would be finished grade. So this is cross section AA, sheet 2 of 3, just as an example. This dark line here would be the finished grade, and the dashed black line here would be the existing grade on all the cross sections.
I can't find that on mine, but we'll never mind, we'll
get it to you.
We'll look for
And
it.
it's hard to see, Mr. Wheaton, because you're looking at a small version, but what we can do is we'll print out the large size plans so that you can pick them up at Mr. Effett's office, because it is hard to see on an 11 by 17, but we'll deliver that and make it available to you, as well as any other board member who'd like a large scale plan.
Okay, good, thank you.
Of course, you're welcome.
Any other comments?
Oh, yeah, it is there. Yeah.
Okay, Jill, you have a hard stop in 6 minutes.
But the granite is prepared to proceed and show you the trail map as well as the 3D rendering. Brett and Jeff, you do have the 3D rendering and then the trail map as well, do you not? So if it pleases the board, they can continue with that, and then I will come back after I have my opening, and then I'll try to come back to the meeting probably in about 20 minutes.
All right, very good. And when you do come back, I want to make sure we cover what's coming in future meetings, so we can prepare for that.
Most certainly. I appreciate everyone's time, and Brett and Jeff, go ahead, and I will be back.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? Are we going to have an opportunity to present with regard to the entrance tonight, or is only the applicant going to be able to do that?
Well, first of all, I want to see what the applicant's going to present, and then you certainly can comment on what's being presented.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll be back.
Okay. Granite Engineering, you're on.
Thank you, Chair. So we have for you tonight 3 perspective view renderings prepared by our project architects. And I think they came out really, really great. The first perspective view is as you drive down Chewbacca heading south. Before you get to the entrance, you will find our tree buffer here, which has been supplemented with evergreens. We have our stone pillars up front with our perennials, and the duplex you see here is the first one as you enter the site on the left, units 34 and 35. The next perspective view is view B, and that's as you get to the center of the entrance looking from Chewbacca. You'll find the stonework as you enter with the perennials and plantings up front. You have the trail parking in through here with a little bit of the buffer as you see to the right of the screen. Units 1, units 32, and units 33 present here with trees up front, perennials and shrubbery around the buildings, and trees as you go through the site. The third and final perspective is looking north as you head towards Essex on Chewbacca, and basically just the opposite view of the first one. And again, we've supplemented with more evergreens to help that buffer. You'll see a strong perennial plantings in through here with our stonework up front, and minimal view of unit 35, the first one as you enter on the left. That's pretty much the overview of the renderings. Be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I just have some clarification questions with this A203. We're looking north. What unit is that on the left? Is that 34, 35?
This is the duplex on the left, 34 and 35.
Okay. And then can you go to the next slide that shows the entrance? Okay. So again, we're looking at 34, 35, and then what's on the right-hand side? Is that unit?
So 34 and 35 are actually off the page. These are the single units, 33, 32, and then this is the first one on the right, number 1.
Okay. So 34, 35 are farther off to the left and we can't see them.
Yeah, they're a little off the page.
Okay. And then back to the first.
Yep.
And then, so we're looking at
So
34, 35 there.
Yeah, 35, 34, and then you can see some of the roof lines of 33 and 32.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Of course.
So, I think, Jonathan, you were the one that asked for these 3D renderings? Is there,
I asked for a 3D model. I didn't ask for specifically these 3 renderings. I have numerous comments about this. Thank you, first of all, thank you very much for doing the modeling. Appreciate it. And will have numerous comments in the future, but I think tonight's not the night for that.
Okay. Any other board member comments?
I think it looks nice.
Okay, so Deborah, I think you wanted to comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I might share my screen, please.
Yep, hold on one sec. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can everyone see this?
So far, so good.
Okay, so we have a short video of Chewbacca Road to show you. These are some of the driveways along Chewbacca Road near the site entrance. You can see that many of them are dirt driveways. This one, I believe, is right across from the entrance. Now driving down Chewbacca Road towards the first area, where you can see this is what will show up in this area. And this is what that same section looks like now. And as you continue down the road, we'll come to the center entrance. And this is where the entrance is, and this is what you'll see. And again, this shows that same area. And as you continue along the road, we'll get to the third rendering. And this is the area where the third rendering is. This is Chewbacca Road as it looks today. This is the neighborhood that this development is going to be in the middle of. And I have just a few more comments that I'd like to make.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So this is the entrance. I don't know about you, but I didn't see anything on that video that looks anything like this. This isn't in keeping with the neighborhood. This is the house that is across the street. Every day when these people leave their house, they're going to be walking out their front door and looking at this. Nothing in common between what's proposed by the developer and what's currently on Chewbacca Road. And I don't know when developers decided that subdivisions had to have grand entrances, and you don't have to allow that. This is under your control. You can decide what this entrance is going to look like. Is it going to look like the neighborhood, or is it going to look like this? Maintaining the neighborhood character and protecting the natural environment, those are priorities of your zoning bylaw. And as you review this project, you need to keep those requirements in the foremost part of your mind. And there are certain provisions of the bylaw that I'd like to point you to. So under the senior housing bylaw, it has the purposes. And the purposes are to expressly protect the natural features and environmental values and utilize the land in harmony with the neighboring properties. And so I'd ask yourself, please ask yourselves, is this in harmony with the neighborhood properties? Also protect Hamilton's rural New England character and put less demand on the natural resources. This development will not preserve the natural resources of the property or natural features of the property. In fact, it's going to decimate the property beyond recognition. Tens of thousands of cubic yards of soil and rock will be removed and redistributed to create the developer's vision. It's clear from this 3D model that there's been no attempt at all to reconcile this subdivision with the neighborhood or to make it consistent with the neighborhood. And despite repeated requests, the developer has not provided you with any information on how much soil or rock will be removed. That's very important information for you to have. There are other sections of the senior housing bylaw that also talk about neighborhood character. And looking at the general requirements, again, you're required to maintain as much of the site as possible in its natural state. And all existing trails shall be preserved. That's what it says, shall be preserved. And so some of the trails are being preserved, so to speak. This is now going to be a maintenance road. All of these existing trails are right behind the houses. This trail going through the middle of the development is going to be gone. This trail over here at the top of the development is gone, replaced by one that goes by the detention pond. And then this one ostensibly is replaced by one that goes by the vernal pond, through people's backyards and over the subdivision road. So again, they are not preserving all of the trails, which is a requirement under the general findings. Also, under the senior housing bylaw, there are certain findings that you are required to make in order to issue this special permit. And you have to show that it's compatible with the adjacent land uses and character of the neighborhood, that it mitigates impacts to abutting land and natural resources, and that it provides visual and noise buffering to minimize the impact to the abutting properties. People directly across the street and down the street from this property are going to see this. This isn't a mitigation of noise or visual impact. This isn't a mitigation of other impacts to the natural resources, and it certainly isn't consistent with the neighborhood. Lastly, you have a general bylaw when you're looking, or general zoning bylaw that talks about what you have to look at with a special permit, and these are all special permits. You have to specifically look at the adverse effects and show that they will not outweigh its beneficial impacts to the town and the neighborhood. Again, you have to look at the neighborhood character, the social structure, and the impacts on the natural environment. The neighborhood character and the social structure have been completely ignored by this developer. It's most evident in this design of the entrance. John Cole likes to say that the developer is tone deaf. I don't think that he is thinking about the neighborhood or looking at the neighborhood. There will be severe impacts on the natural environment, which I'm sure we will discuss in much more detail as we go along. The proposed blasting and soil removal will change the topography and geology of this land forever, and has a very real potential for impacting both municipal and private wells. So we ask that you require the developer to provide you with all the information that you need to make this decision. And again, think of the neighborhood character, which must be part of your decision, as well as the impact on the natural resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any
Chairman,
other?
could I make a few comments?
Sure.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself.
Larry Smith, the Managing Director of Chewbacca Hill Capital Partners. Not to go through the code in detail, but a few general comments. So first of all, we believe that this site does preserve the natural character of the town, because as you're driving down Essex Street, which is the main thoroughfare of the town, you could not see any of the homes that are built because of the large wood buffer. And the fact that this is 66 acres and so much of it is preserved, including the farmland, really does preserve the natural character of the town. It might not preserve the natural character of the town from the perspective of just a few homeowners across the street. I think that's easy to concede. But I think when we initially brought this to the attention of town officials, there was a fairly positive response because the natural view corridor will be preserved. And I think part of the cross sections that were presented really do show how difficult, if at all, you could see any of the structures that are built, again, from what really is the thoroughfare of Essex Street. The other piece is, we talk about it inviting that entranceway. And by the way, we are not tone deaf, and if there are recommendations for different design at the entranceway, we are all ears. But I think that's premature, as we said many times tonight. But one of the components was the ability to people to enter the trails and have parking on that site. Now, on any given day, more so in the past before the no trespassing signs went up, people just pull over to the shoulder of the road, park, and walk through what is, I mean, I think you just got to say this, is a private land. The way Deborah was making this out to be, you know, this is part of Chewbacca Woods, and we're developing Chewbacca Woods. We are not. This is private land, as we talked about before, and we're attempting to preserve the trails to a certain extent and open them up to the public. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, and we have I saw some raised hands here, so. Christina, you're on. You're muted, Christina.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yes, I live at Fort Villa, and we're 3 generations now that live in our home. And it's really not true that we won't be impacted, that this will only impact a few that live across this subdivision. This is devastating to a lot of us who know this land and this area as home in a unique way. And we're really trusting that the board will hear that and take that into consideration. I know there's bylaws and all these ways we do this. I don't understand them. I'm a simple person, but I'm not a stupid person. And really like to just state that this is very impactful. And so the people that have said this is nice, this looks nice, people won't be impacted, none of you live here in Hamilton. And for us that live here and have lived here for many, many years, this is very difficult and very devastating because this isn't a part of this area. And thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Do we have any other raised hands?
A couple.
We got a couple, okay. Mike. Hold on, Mike, while we connect you.
Hello, this is Mike Nassimi. I live at 19 Appaloosa Lane in Hamilton here. I just want to make sure it's very clear to the developer that preserving the trails and having the view of those trails be the back of homes is not really in the best interests of the townspeople. The fact that this land was used for decades by the owner of the land to be used as a park and is now being, raped to the point where it's being built and 20 feet of fill is taken away is very disingenuous to preservation of the land. Thank you.
Okay, do we have other?
Heather?
Say again?
Heather?
Heather. Hold on, Heather, we're going to connect you.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead, Heather. Heather?
Oh, yes. I just want to highlight what I see as two different perspectives that are coming through in the planning board. And one is a perspective that is more fragmented in how you approach this whole development process and the decisions that are made, that I think really isolates it from a larger perspective on what this is really about from a more holistic perspective. And I really appreciate the planning board members who are looking at this in a more holistic way. For those of us who live here, and I'm also on Villa Road, for those of us who live here and have loved this land for generations, you can't separate everything out the way the developer is trying to do that. You can't pretend that you can isolate this piece of land from the surrounding ecosystem that it's a part of, or from the way in which it's impacting everything around it. And I think the more we get caught in that kind of fragmented approach, the more dangerous it is the direction that we're going in seeing this out of context and without understanding the larger impact to the neighborhood, to the environment, and ultimately to the town and critical resources for the town. Thank you.
Okay, I'd actually like to address that. This is something that people have expressed concern about. We're taking this is like putting a puzzle together. There are individual pieces that we need to deal with, and we've discussed the inclusionary housing bylaw that we're waiting for our attorney to come back and determine whether, in fact, the board's interpretation was correct. We just dealt with the base density. That's a key element for establishing whether, in fact, 50 units can be proposed on this site. So we need to build a foundation to determine whether, in fact, based on our bylaws, this is a project that we can even consider, or does it fail at some point on one of the bylaws that we are charged with enforcing? Once we get to that level and determine whether, in fact, it's a viable project, then we can get into the larger issues of how this fits into the neighborhood, how it's going to impact the neighborhood, what are the costs, what are the benefits. But until we establish that foundation, we don't know if this project is viable. So I again ask people for some patience. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We are going to be talking about this project for many, many months. We will get to those subjects in great detail. Patience is required as we go through each element to determine the viability of this project and whether it meets the intent, the exact requirements and intent of the bylaw. So it is a slow process. It's not clean. It's going to take a lot of time to get to that determination. So do we have any other questions? Patrick?
Just
Rocket.
as a point to support your comments, Mr. Chair, the way that a special permit vote is taken and the way that this board over the years has taken it has been in a fairly fragmented approach, because to think about it, when you are voting on a project and you're discussing traffic generation, that's a very discrete thought. That is not the thought process that you're using relative to density, which is relative to a dozen other individual votes that the board is going to have to take as part of the process. It's fragmenting a project in a way that allows for focused discussion from all sides, which I think is really important for us to be able to track discussions, track facts, and how to put the facts together for a better project. And at the culmination of the hearing, there is a consummate decision by the board that gets taken. So, that is the end process and the end decision-making that gets taken based on the preceding successes and the addressal of the individual items up to that point.
Good, thank you. Any comments from the board? Okay, so I think we're going to be in a little bit of a hiatus here while we're waiting for Jill to come back, because I think we've covered that unless there are any other questions from the public. I don't see any hands up. Okay, so I can actually read these. Is that curbing? That is not fitting with the rustic neighborhood. Okay, representing the citizens of Hamilton, why is the planning board taking this project? Why is this board taking the applicant seriously with a 20-foot cut of rock with an initial 75-foot entrance in addition to an upland site that has been deemed unbuildable due to significant ledge? Because we take every applicant seriously. The applicant has every right to make a presentation to the planning board. And so it's our duty to hear the applicant's presentation and determine whether in fact the applicant's meets the intent and requirements of the bylaw. So is there any other questions? Can the planning board present a general timeline with specific subject matter and votes to be covered? The chair continues to describe this project as a marathon, not a sprint. Can this imagery be translated into a definitive timeline with criteria and milestones the board is tracking? I think tracking. That's a good question. And there's not a clear answer. We have to go through the base bylaws, and you've seen some of this discussion over inclusionary, and that inclusionary bylaw discussion has not yet been resolved. It's still pending an opinion by the town's attorney. So that in and of itself is a small demonstration of the what's the word I want? How this discussion may get delayed in certain elements. We're talking about establishing the base density tonight, and we've done that. Again, we're doing that, and we were responding, the applicant was responding to a specific question by a planning board member to present 3D modeling or renderings of what the proposed entrance would look like. So, no, I can't give you a specific timeline. As I said, this is putting together pieces of the puzzle. At the end of each meeting, we will describe and try to determine what the next steps will be for the board, so both the board knows, the applicant knows, and the public knows which is going to be discussed at the next meeting so that we can all be prepared. But this is not a clean, linear process by any stretch of the imagination. I think that's it.
Mr. Chairman, could I add something to that?
Go ahead.
So, in reference to that comment or request from the public, I'm wondering if there is a way for us not to necessarily map out the entire process from beginning to end, nor give it a timeline, but if we could take it a little bit of a step beyond what's at the next meeting and try to create, or at least discuss, about trying to create a little bit more of a forward-looking structure to this beyond just what's on the next agenda. I think that would be a worthy conversation to see if we can come up with a structure that we can agree with that creates at least some kind of a beginning framework that can have flexibility within it as information unfolds, but to try to give it a little bit more intention about next steps.
Okay. Would you like, are you volunteering to create that?
I would propose initially as a little bit of a discussion. For example, right now we have a little bit of downtime before Jill comes back. We could discuss it right now.
I'm all ears.
Can I jump in there for a second? I think the problem is that really has to be done by Jill.
I was just going to jump in, if you don't mind. I agree. And I think, Jonathan, if you'd like us to project a month or so in the future, I think we could do that. But it's really about getting our consultants in line and getting the proper components put into place to present. As you know, Jonathan, it's a complex project and it doesn't happen quickly. But I think that's a good comment. I think our development team, could most likely get more than just the next hearing and probably 2 hearings looking forward and present the topics to Patrick during the next, at least before the next meeting. Or at least a week or so before that.
I guess what I'm saying is I'm proposing it as a dialogue. I agree that your consultants need to respond to what's a logical progression in this and in terms of work product and realistic timelines for producing that. And I think it would also be useful for the board to have a little bit of intention. So it's a dialogue, that's all.
But we need something to start with. So I think having an introductory set of issues and topics, even if there are no dates attached to them, or firm dates, that's a good starting point. And then we can sit and look at that and say, oh, we forgot this, this is going to be a really long set of topics, and this will be a very short set. We have to start somewhere. So I think the attorney and the petitioner could present us with a list, or Patrick could present us with a list. This plan is going to involve the following things. We'd probably like to do them in this order, and then we can have the dialogue.
I think there are certain aspects of the project that are very related. For instance, grading would be related to blasting, would be related to geotechnical and hydrology. So there are segmented areas that I think focus well together. What I think is important, though, is for us to approach those and schedule those out based on when the applicant has that information fully available and researched and ready for us. You know, other items like the site plan, site design, traffic-related circulation design, those are all segmented too that I think work well together, you know, in potentially one night.
Yes, no, but we need a list to start with, and then we can say, well, this is going to be a really involved thing. Maybe we should schedule it, you know, later as opposed to sooner. But a roadmap would be good.
Did have her hand up? Deborah did have her hand up?
Did you want to make a comment?
Just
wait to hear
one
from
comment, Mr. Chairman. I just want to be sure that the board doesn't lose sight of the fact that there are certain things that you need to make sure that you address through this process. So while there should be certainly a dialogue with the applicant to make sure they have the information and their consultants ready, having some general roadmap with the board setting out how that's going to work is something that I think you need to keep in mind.
I would respond that our roadmap is the zoning bylaw. That is the exact element that the voters of Hamilton have invested in the individuals on this board to utilize as decision-making processes, and the process and the elements thereof. We've talked about this on a number of occasions heretofore, that we need to follow the bylaw, and it is fairly well regimented in a followable way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't agree with that. Okay, Marty, you.
I think that what would be most helpful is if the applicant set forth an agenda and identified the various topics in line with the requirements of the bylaw. And then it would be helpful too if Jonathan and Emil, who are expert in some of these other areas, also came up with a proposed agenda, and then we could exchange these documents and try and come up with a workable plan going forward. Because it doesn't seem to me to be very helpful to be considering what I'll use a term loosely, rough drafts. I mean, we really have to get to the heart of this, and if the applicant isn't prepared to go forward on some of these things, well, we can work our way around some more discrete issues like traffic and landscaping, but Patrick's right. I mean, the heart of this is going to be the grading, the blasting, and the hydrology, and there are going to be discrete topics within those topics, and I think we have to come up with some type of intelligent way of addressing these so that we can get good evidence and not platitudes. So perhaps just exchanging some ideas on going forward. Because, you know, it is a marathon, but I personally can't run a marathon. So if we could shorten it a little bit and get to the, to really address these things and not talk in general terms, but get to hard evidence. And so, how to break those kind of broad topics into more discrete issues that can generate some data and evidence that we can really address. And that, goes to Attorney Eliason's point about the materials being removed, what all that means, how the blasting will affect the hydrology and the kind of studies that we need. So we can spin our wheels, but we have to get into the nitty-gritty at some point, and I think it'd be helpful for the applicant to set out what it thinks the path forward should be, And also, if any of the board members have ideas of how we should proceed over time, I think if we exchange those, we might be able to come up with something that's really workable and will help us make our ultimate decision.
I think ultimately it's up to the applicant to set the agenda, because they are going to be hiring or have already hired specialists to do engineering information and so on. And when they have that information available, they'll be able to present it. So I think it's basically up to them to set that agenda and the process.
So I would suggest this. Larry has already said that he's willing to try and put together a schedule. I'm sure Jill will agree. Patrick, if maybe you can work with Jill and Larry, and if Jonathan and any other board member has a proposed structure, so that we come up with something we can at least look at and see if that makes sense to us for future discussions.
And I think that the idea of that would be to be a little proactive, so well before it happens, everybody can see it and be aligned with it. The applicant, the board,
Oh, yeah, no, I
the
think
consultants.
it makes a great deal of sense, so. It makes for a much more efficient discussion as well, you know, so that we're not sort of going off on tangents, and it makes my job much easier as well. If, you know, people suddenly decide they want to go off and talk on a topic, we'll just say, well, that's not on the agenda, that's not in the structures, and unless the majority of the board agrees to go off on that tangent, we're sticking to the agreed-upon roadmap.
That approach addresses my initial concern.
Good.
Thank you.
So, I'm wondering in the interim, Patrick, since Jill is not back, whether we have the ability or can address any of these other A&R requests. There's only one.
Rick, if you'd like, we could have Granite Engineering go through the trail map if you'd like, till Jill gets back, because that was also on the agenda tonight, which has not been covered.
Okay.
Great. Brent, you want to
get
started?
Thank you, Larry. I was just going to interject saying that. If I could share my screen here. Everybody see my screen here?
Yes.
So we provided the planning board with this trail map of the existing trails that are out there, and how we would like to change that trail location. So the gray ones shown are the ones that will no longer be in use. The purple trails are the trails that are on the property. The blue trails are the trails that are off the property, and the green trails are how we're going to link the two in order to replicate the gray trails. So as you'll see, there's a purple trail down here, and in order to connect with the purple trail up here, we have this serpentine green line that connects this one. In order to replicate this gray trail and through here, we have this green trail that connects from here through to the parking area, around, and connecting back into the purple trail here. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
May I ask a quick question here, which is whether the existing trails on this map are what we would call customary trails, or whether they're legal trails? That is to say, are they maintained by some entity like the Essex County Trail Association? What happens when a tree goes down? Or are they just places where people have walked for 50 years? Is there a legal status in any way to the existing trails on the property, or are they just, as I said, customary trails?
Bill, I can answer that question. There is no legal means for people to enter the property today Our goal is to make it legal for people to enter the property. But today, there is no legal means to enter the property. If they do, it's actually trespassing.
Okay.
So there's no maintenance of the trails that we know of. Thank you.
All the board members have an 11 by 17 copy of this trail map, if that would be helpful to you.
Yeah, that is better than the smaller one. Okay. So,
Mr. Chairman, I think the attorney has her hand up. You want to?
Deborah?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one comment with regard to the legality of the trails. They have been used for decades, and so there may be some legal arguments with regard to rights that the public has acquired by adverse possession or prescription. And I believe that there was also a letter from their Conservation Commission not many years ago where they asserted that position. And I would be happy to provide a copy of that letter at some point. I don't have it handy right now. Thank you.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting question, and nobody has claimed adverse possession. So, and the other thing is the letter from the Conservation Commission was done, as from what I understand, and we could get a legal opinion on this, was not done in a legal manner. There needs to be a public hearing process on doing so. And that was never done. So I think the Conservation Commission coordinator at the time overstepped his authority in putting those trails on any map because there is a very clearly delineated legal process for determining whether, in fact, those are public trails, and that process was never done.
And Rick, if I could add, the property owner's attorney, Marshall Hanley, I believe all the board members have in their files, his interpretation of who owns the property and who has rights to the property, which is in essence the owners of the property. Nobody else has any rights to this property. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Jonathan?
I just have a quick technical sort of point to make. I don't want to get lost on it because it's micro minutia at this point, but I would just ask that any of the realigned trails, that you look at the topography and make sure that the trails are maintainable and sustainable, you know, that they don't go straight up 50% slopes or anything like that. That's all.
Okay, good. So,
but the existing owners have given no easements or anything in any way to make these trails, you know, permanent pathways.
The existing owners have not given anyone easement rights to any of these trails.
Okay.
I'm back too.
Go ahead, Jill, jump in.
Hi. No, that's fine. No, this land is completely private. There is absolutely no entitlement to use any of the property at all.
okay, Jill. So while you were gone, we had we went through the trails map. We talked about the cross sections, and one thing that I think we all agreed is, and Larry did as well, is that we need a more concise and predictable road path forward in terms of what the board is going to be presented. So we and the public and you as the applicant know what's coming in the next meetings, so that we have at least some framework of a roadmap of the subjects we're going to cover, rather than just sort of waiting 1 week ahead. And I've asked Patrick to work with you and Larry and Jonathan Poor and any other board members to see if we can construct a predictable path forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I think would you like me to discuss what I believe is going to be the next group of subject matters, which I think is going to be very relevant to Mr. Poor's comments, Mr. Dahlquist's comments, Mr. Wheaton's, everybody's comments relative to the actual, I guess, grading and regrading of the property and the limitations. But I do want to say that when you look at that, everyone needs to be certain that what you look at is, you don't look at the raw site and you say, oh, this is what's going to happen. You compare what the by right use is to what the use is going to be under the special permit. And that's when we can go into that comments, and I can provide that to you too, Mr. Mitchell.
You're getting, we want to actually sort of a 5,000 foot rather than a 50-foot overview of what are the subtopic areas, subject areas that we were going to be discussing going forward. So we have an appendix, if you will, of here's what's coming. We understand there's a lot of this is dependent on what your consultants have prepared, but if you could look forward into the future, you know, in 3 months would be great, but that may be too far out. But we'd like to at least have an appendix listing subject areas that you are going to be prepared to talk about, so that we can segment those into digestible component pieces and schedule those in a manner so that we can actually have a thoughtful, careful discussions about those.
Sure. No, I mean, I can work with Patrick on that tomorrow. Right now, I can tell you that we plan on doing a general overview of the project, discussing the grade changes at the next one, resolving the affordable aspect, because that just needs to get put to bed, and I understand that the attorney is going to get back to you. We are going to provide, you know, the complete site layout, the description of the property, and then demonstrate how we actually comply with all the purposes, which, by the way, are, you know, conservation minded relative to senior housing. And I can go through all that with Mr. Ruffett tomorrow, or I can try and sketch something out for you right now.
No. We want, there's not a rush. We want sort of quality and predictability rather than, you know, rapid response. It's really, it's a recurring theme among planning board members and the public as well, is that we'd like to have some sort of sense of the predictability. We understand that there's got to be flexibility in that. But we wanted to sort of have a roadmap of what subject we are going to be discussing as far in the future as possible.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we did give you that for this particular meeting, but you want it projected out through months, correct? Like 3 and 4 meetings out.
Yes.
I mean, that would be, the further out, the more flexible, but of course I can do that with Mr. Ruffett. Absolutely.
I'm not sure we wanted 3 or 4 meetings out. We would like a list of we need to have an agenda that has to be done. And if it takes 10 meetings or 20 meetings or whatever, we'll cover it. But it's a question of what are the questions that have to be asked and answered, and in order to get this project through.
Yep, understood. Will do, Mr. Wheaton.
Okay, Jill.
Couple hands are raised.
Oh, hands are raised. Thank you. Mike?
Hello again, Mike Massini, 19 Appaloosa Lane. Could I ask the applicant to put the trail map back up, please?
Say that again?
Could I ask the applicant if we could see the trail map one more time again, and I'd like to speak to that.
We can.
Granted, okay, there we go.
Okay, we have the trail map up.
Okay, great, thank you. So I do want to make some clarifying points. Prior to Mr. Smith making a bid on this property, it was on the Essex County Trail Association map. They had their own map for this area. And the property was open to the public, which we appreciate the landowner giving people access to it. For decades, Mr. Rich allowed the folks of the community to actually use the trails and then remove any trees, branches that were, impeding any of the trails. So just want to make that clarification. On the green trail here, I'm wondering is that going through a vernal pool area?
No. May I respond, Mr. Mitchell, or?
Absolutely.
Okay, so with regard, I have no doubt that the trails were shown on something. It doesn't make them out of the realm of prohibition by an owner, and that's exactly what's happened. So with regard to the green trail, though, no, it does not go through a vernal pool. The existing trail, as it sits today, goes through many of the, you can see it goes right through. Those are existing. The green is the only one that isn't existing. So we don't ever go through a vernal pool. We'll skirt on the edge of a wetland to be able to loop up with trails that go through the wetland currently. And that's what you see.
Okay, thanks, Jill.
Of course.
Any other questions?
There's one more hand raised.
We have one more question.
Heather Answorth, 4 Villa Road. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I just really appreciate that the board is charting out a course in terms of how this will be reviewed and discussed. And I would also just ask that the board, in following up on Marnie's comment, that we often get a lot of platitudes without good evidence, that the board also specify the data and documentation that is needed to address the different issues that are coming up. Because part of my concern in witnessing this as a member of the public is that we often get this great presentation of how beautiful all of this is going to be, such as the 3D renderings, which are beautiful images in isolation. But when you begin to unpack what's really involved with the level of blasting and cut involved in that, it's terrifying. So I would really appreciate that the board also really track the data and documentation that is presented by the developers team so that we really know what we're dealing with in more detail. Thank you.
Yeah, and the board certainly will do that, and at the applicant's expense, the board is hiring independent third-party consultants to review whatever data the applicant is producing. So we're not just taking the applicant's word for it. Any other questions? Do we have somebody? Kathy?
Hi, I'm here. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, hi. Thank you for taking my comments, board. But I would like the board to note that while my father may have been gracious and allowed people to walk on the property, there were no legal trails. They were just people making pathways. And I always respond to them as pathways because they are not trails, okay? When we did find out several years ago that some entities had put them on their trail maps as trails, we actually sought out and asked them to, very nicely remove them, of which they did not. And then I actually had our attorneys, Marshall Hanley and Carla Cox of Handling and Cox, provide documentation and legal issues to have them removed. And all of the, and I still think that they're on there, although they did put down that it is private property. which I was happy to see. But there's only so much you can fight that issue. And you are right, Chair Mitchell, that somebody within the town took it upon themselves to make some legal comments that were not legal comments regarding that. This is private property. It has been owned by my parents and now my brothers and I since the mid to late 50s. It was bought to develop. Once again, no legal trails. They're just people who have walked on the land. And then my brothers and I, when we put the land on the market, and prior to that, we put up no trespassing signs. I also want the board to be aware of all the destruction. You had a previous comment from somebody, and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Okay, that, my dad allowed you all to cut trees down and so forth, and not that I recall. And I'm 63 years old, so I think I've been around for long enough to know what was going on, and I've been very involved in the land with my father and mother as they aged in place. But there's been a lot of destruction on the land. And I'd like to just bring up a few of those points. And it's very disheartening, very disappointing that the destruction, the vandalism, and the trespassing on this private property that is owned by my brothers and I repeat that, it is owned by us personally in our Country Squire Realty corporation that my father designed way back when to just house this particular property. Okay, my husband and I personally installed mesh orange net fencing on all the pathway ends. Okay, the pathways that were made by people, not trails. They're not legal trails. I repeat that, not legal trails. Okay, these were all torn down. We posted, and I personally put them up myself, 150 no trespassing signs in bright colors, who owned the land. Almost all of them were torn down. We installed at great expense Jersey barriers with no trespassing posted on both ends or all the ends of the property, and they were spray painted over. Then the Jersey barriers and somebody really had to have worked very hard at this, because those things you cannot move easily, as I know how they were installed. Okay, but they were turned over, and somebody had to have put a chain on them to try and move them from the property on 2 of the 3 parts of the property that the Jersey barriers are on. Okay, trees have been cut illegally with chainsaws without permission. My father has been dead since 2014, my mother since 2012. There are trees that are freshly cut on there, and we didn't cut them. I go on the land, periodically, because it's our land, my brothers and I have the right to walk my own property, but I will tell you that sometimes I'm afraid to walk my own property because of the destruction that's been going on. I've been verbally accosted by people on these pathways that I just happen to be out on because I pay the taxes on that property. Okay, I pay the liability insurance on the property. Okay, so I've informed bikers, I try to do it very kindly and so forth, but I get reamed by people. Okay, and then I read letters to the town regarding saving our trails and being on the land, and I'm just amazed that someone would write and state that they illegally trespassed on somebody's private property. And I wonder if they would want that in their backyard, on their private property and so forth. So, what I don't understand is, we've paid greatly for this property over the past 60 years. Okay, this is something that we want to do, and I hope that the board will understand the disheartening and the disappointment of this destruction and the vandalism and the trespassing. And we have sought legal relief, about keeping people off of the property, and also to not put trails on maps, trails that really didn't exist, just people's pathways and their feet made them into what that is. So thank you, board. I really appreciate it. I'm sure I don't come off as the happiest person. However, this is very important to me as well. I know that the neighbors are not happy about this, but it is a reality that this property is going to be developed. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. I'd like to move on to the next subject. So Jill, are we on to the A&R?
Sure, absolutely.
And I think that's the last subject for the evening?
Yep.
Okay, so this is an A&R request by the owners, Country Squire Realty, Chewbacca Hill Capital Partners, seeking a Form A approval not required endorsement from the board regarding said property to modify the existing property into 2 parcels, lots 1 and 2. So Jill?
Good evening. So the A&R plan has been submitted. As the board knows, it's simply a request that the board endorse the plan as not requiring approval. It is not a subdivision. So under Chapter 41, Section 81P, that's just the subdivision, the A&R process. If you do not have a subdivision, then the board, it's incumbent upon the board to execute and endorse the plan that there is no subdivision. What that means is, just to be pedantic for the whole public, is that those lots that are shown, lot 1, lot 2, that they have frontage on a way. And as you can see, there is over 1,000 feet of frontage on these property on Essex Street, and then there's something like 500 feet of frontage, I might have it backwards, on Chewbacca. Each of them have more than enough access to be able to create access. And in fact, the farm continues to use the land off of Essex, and there is access to be had off of Chewbacca. So basically, the plan should be endorsed because it doesn't show a subdivision. It simply shows the creation in the formalization of the already existing boundary between the Rich's property, which is the farmland that it leases out. And that line is just something that we formalized from licensing agreements that the Rich family has had with the abutting farmland and user. And that's it.
Thank you, Jill.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve an A&R.
Okay, do we have a second? We don't have a second, so I have a question. I'd like Patrick, since the board hasn't dealt with a lot of A&Rs and the public may not understand what that means, can you give us a 2-minute primer on the board's responsibilities and role here?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Massachusetts general laws provide for what is known as an approval not required, and that allows property owners or prospective property owners with the approval of the actual owners to be able to subdivide to create a new lot. We have done a number over the past. There are hundreds and hundreds of A&R lots that have been approved in Hamilton. The test for an A&R lot is twofold. Does the property have access, number one? And number two, does it have the legal frontage that it must have onto an operable roadway, whether public or private? This application process is pretty basic. It basically asks for the applicant, the approval of the owner for the subdivision process that takes place. They pay a fee, and then the board acts upon the A&R application that comes to it based on those 2 items, again, access and frontage.
Okay, thank you. Any questions by the board? Jonathan, I think this is what you were looking for?
Yes, just to clean up the process.
Okay. So, Any comments, questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? If there are issues that would disqualify the applicant, RE water management blast, yeah, this is not a subject that we're discussing at currently, and I think we've discussed in great detail about coming subject areas. So, do you want to try again, Bill?
I would make a motion that we approve the A&R for the 133 Essex Street property.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Marnie Crouch seconded it. All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Corey?
Corey, will you, yes?
Arnie? Oops. Yeah.
Richard Boroff, aye.
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Rick Mitchell, aye. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other items, Jill?
We just need to continue the public hearing, and if you'd like, we can discuss the agenda for the next meeting, if that's helpful, and then Patrick and I can still work on that long-term list. Up to you, I just offer it.
I think it would be worth a 2-minute discussion on what you see as the future subjects, but then I'd like those to be codified and distributed so that everybody knows what's coming.
100%. So I keep hearing all of this, complaint that we're not giving sufficient information. That's just because we were trying to get ministerial stuff out of the way, and it's been labored and difficult to do that. We have been responding to the peer review engineer, and that's where all the real substantive meat comes. So what we intend to do at our next meeting, which would be, I believe, on November 9th, because of your
town election.
An election, thank you. We plan to present the information from the peer review, which means we plan to update the plans. We plan on showing you our ledge removal plan. We plan on showing you our hydrology report relative to the ledge removal. We plan on demonstrating our grades, our grade change. As far as the export of material, we can't finalize an export of material until we can finalize the project. I can give you estimates, but doesn't mean anything. Export is a very difficult thing, and that doesn't come until we know what we have and how we're going to come in. So this particular next meeting is going to be to present to you our peer review response. It will be to update the plan and give that blast ledge removal. I don't want to say blast because it's not all blast. It's ledge removal and grading of the roadway and then the attendant foundations for the buildings.
Okay.
And then obviously we need to get resolved the whole affordable component part, because that's the crux of an economic issue and has to be resolved for us. It must be done at the November meeting for us to be able to move forward with confidence with regard to the economics of the project. So that we would like to see as well.
Right. And I'm sure we can get it because that gives the attorney ample time to render an opinion. With regard to the level of what you discussed that we'll be presenting on November 9th, this sounds like a lot of very complex information is going to be coming at the board. I really urge you to put them in discrete, digestible component pieces. I know they all interrelate, so there's the desire to put them all together so that we have a holistic picture. But for the purposes, and I said this earlier, and I think it's true, at least for some of us that are on the older range of age, is after 2 hours of detailed technical information and debate, it starts to be the equivalent of trying to put 24 ounces of liquid into a 16-ounce glass. So I want to be mindful, and as well of the public's ability to follow and pay attention for a period of time. I'm really concerned that they be in digestible segments.
And we can most certainly do that. I can segment each individual aspect. Then I would just ask that when the abutters and this group provide comments, that they give it to us in advance so that we can work it in, because this is supposed to be a vetting process, not just an opposition in a trial. I mean, I just need that information so I can do that for you. So I just asked that that be provided ahead of time, and that if it isn't provided ahead of the meeting, that then it has to be contemplated at the next meeting
Right.
when we do have that opportunity, and I'll be able to segment. And then what we can do is show, I can give it to, Attorney Ellison too. I can say, okay, look, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to segment, so she's able to properly plan as well. I can do that.
Yeah, and I think it's to your best interest as well, so that we can actually have thoughtful comments
Oh, yeah.
that are actually directed to a specific topic area rather than sort of general, I don't like it kind of comments.
I agree. It would be very helpful to us as well.
Okay, and Patrick?
And Mr. Chairman, if I might just
Yeah, hold on
say
one
that-
second.
Just as a scheduling note for everybody, our next meeting date is October the 19th.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Which would be followed by the November the 9th meeting.
That's right. I forgot that. Yep.
Okay, good, thank you, all right.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say that we did provide our materials the week ahead of time, as we were requested to do. And then there were additional materials provided by the applicant. So this kind of gets to be a back and forth. And so whoever gets the last word, I guess, is the issue. And we'll do our best to certainly provide everyone with the information that we have. But sometimes things come up at the meeting that have to be addressed at the meeting.
Oh,
I agree, but it's the presentation of materials that's the problem.
I couldn't
And
agree, I couldn't
sometimes those
agree, I couldn't agree
presentations are
more,
related
and that's
to-
part of the reason that these are non-linear processes, because there's the back and forth comments that we have to take into consideration, both from board members and the public. So that's why it gets a little bit convoluted at times.
I agree. And we'll do our best to certainly get everything ahead of time to the extent that we can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I think we've covered the subject areas for the senior housing special permit. So we need to take a vote to, unless there's any other comments or questions, I'd like to entertain a motion to continue the hearing to October 19th.
Make a motion to continue the hearing on 133 Essex Street until October 19th.
Second.
All right, any discussion? We'll do a roll call vote. Emil?
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Richard Boroff, aye.
Barney Crouch, aye.
Corey Beaulieu, aye.
Rick Mitchell, aye. All right, so we are done with this subject for tonight. So,
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. See you in a couple of weeks.
okay, thank you to everybody who attended and commented as well.
Thank you, board members.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the A&R request at 617 Highland Ave.
Tracy Hutchinson is the applicant's representative, if she's up there.
This is a good example of another A&R request.
It's going the other way, though, I think, no?
Hi, are you able to hear me?
We are.
We have what, especially after this wonderful presentation that we've just listened to, this should hopefully be a very quick decision, I would think. The Roberts, Paul, and Amy, who own 617 Highland, would like to be able to fold the land that they have at 609 Highland back into the property at 617.
Just a note to the board, this is a property that currently is in two parcels. The applicant is seeking to remove that interior lot line, which now makes it into two, and they simply want to remove that to make it into one singular property. As we discussed a while ago, this property has access, it has frontage.
So it's two discrete lots currently?
Yes.
Okay. And we're looking to combine it into one.
What's the advantage to doing that, Patrick?
It allows you to basically say, this is my entire property, rather than, having to maintain a deed with two parcels into it. Not a big deal, but to some people it is.
And it's also called continuity. Any questions
you.
from the board? All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve the A&R requested for 617 Highland Avenue.
I move that we approve the A&R for 617 Highland Avenue.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, a roll call vote. We'll start with Corey.
Corey Beaulieu, aye.
Marty Crouch, aye.
Richard Boroff, aye.
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
And Rick Mitchell, aye. So we have finished with that subject, and now we are on to board business. We talked about the upcoming schedule of October 19th and November 9th.
Say goodbye to Tracy.
Say again?
Say goodbye to Tracy.
Oh.
Parting is such sweet sorrow.
Yeah, okay.
Have a great night. Thanks for all your efforts.
Thank you. Patrick?
So on the 19th, we have a couple of items to address, the first of which is the zoning article. As I had mentioned to the board and the public before, there are a number of locations in our zoning bylaw that refers to the Board of Selectmen. Our existing board has chosen to have a non-gender specific term. They're using select board, and they have an article to change all of the town bylaws accordingly. They're asking that the zoning bylaw be changed accordingly as well. So that's what that article is about. Let's see, another item that we will entertain on the 19th is a public hearing for Chewbacca Road, which is a scenic road. It has been the subject of a design process by the town's engineering consultant, Woodard and Curran, for quite some time. They've gone through the Conservation Commission approval process. They've worked with the state. It is an interesting roadway, very historic over time. Its location is in a number of instances not on town property, actually on private property, and has wandered over time. So the project is to do a full-depth reconstruction, and there are portions of it also that are unpaved. So the town will be doing that project, but they're first seeking to have the scenic roadway herein by this board, which statutorily is the municipal process. I have confirmed that on Chewbacca Road there are not historic stone walls, so that would have been an element to have addressed had they been there, but they're not. There will be a fair amount of trees that are in the construction right-of-way. I think it's to be a 50-foot right-of-way, but the roadway itself is to be 24 feet. Even as that dimension, because the existing roadway width goes down to 17 feet in some locations. There are some trees that will need to be cleared during that preparation process. So that'll be one of the things that the consultant will be illustrating to us when they present it to us at the next meeting.
So, and I hope we take that into consideration when constructing our 133 Essex agenda as well, because that sounds like that's going to be probably a half-hour to 45-minute presentation and discussion.
I would expect that. So,
and one of my concerns is we're getting into the blasting and grading and hydrology. So, again, digestible, bite-sized components.
I have made Attorney Mann and Mr. Smith aware, as I have John Cole and Heather as well, that on the 19th, we have those two other items, those hearings that we need to make some progress on. Actually, we need to consummate both of them that night. So, and particularly the zoning article has to be done that night because town meeting
Right,
is the
it's a
following
warrant,
weekend.
it's a warrant article. That's actually a very perfunctory, that should take 5 minutes.
Yeah,
'Cause we're just changing.
I would
the-
agree.
That's gonna just change the wording in the bylaws from Board of Selectmen to, what are we calling it, Select Board?
Select Board.
Select Board. So that's a 5 minute, so, but the other one could be at least half hour, 40 minutes, so keep that in mind in constructing our next agenda.
Yep.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, discussions?
I'd like to thank Mr. Norton for his ongoing help.
Yes. Yes, we have to somehow figure out how to, I don't want to say compensate because that'll get me into trouble, but reward you for your diligent efforts in keeping us on track and in touch with the public and keeping this whole thing flowing. Without you, we could be in serious trouble.
Got a lot of help.
All right. I think that's it. So unless anybody has anything else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to
Make a
adjourn.
motion to adjourn the meeting?
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Emil?
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Patrick, you had something you,
Let me remind everybody, we need to sign the A&R plans.
Before you leave, everybody has to sign those. There are two different plans there, so.
Two different plans, do the Mylars first, and then two additional of each, one for the clerk and then one for our office.
Okay. So I think we had do we have a second? Yes, we did. So we're doing roll call. Emil, you said aye.
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Jonathan Porter, aye.
Bill Wheaton, aye?
Richard Boroff, aye.
Marty Crouch, aye.
Corey Beaulieu, aye.
Rick Mitchell, aye. Meeting adjourned.